couple. Okay, we begin a new 5-week series this morning called New World in the Morning. Some of you might recognize the title because back in the day, my pattern was to preach on a series of sermons and then within a year or two turn them into classes, which I liked because in preaching I was giving my perspective, but it didn't really allow people to necessarily own, the issue and respond to the issue, maybe internalize the issue, maybe amend the issue a little bit. And so this is my chance to come back to this particular theme. And the theme rises out of the notion that the church has fallen on hard times. And I mean the church, period. Anywhere in the world, the church has fallen. Well, not necessarily, come to think of it. Global South, it's doing fairly good, but the church in a lot of places in the world has fallen on hard times. And yet I am really optimistic. And how do I put these two ideas together? And that's what these next 5 weeks are about. And we begin today with the coming great spiritual awakening, which as we get to the end, you'll see that that's what I believe is happening. Now, what forms the background to this is factors that come from sociology, that come from theology, and that come from history, and that come from current affairs. One of my great interests has always been current affairs, and for a number of years I led a reading group, an interfaith reading group in town called Readings in Current Affairs. And so a lot of the information that we're dealing with here comes from that. So I open up with, I've already told you the answer to this, but you can now correct me. How's church doing? How is church doing? How is church doing in America? How is church doing globally? What's the word on the street? And let's think largely of America. We could go to Europe, but when we answer for America, we're usually answering for Europe 40 years ago. Yes, Sheldon.
It seems to me that the church can do a better job with young people. A lot of young people may grow up in the church, and their families growing up, but when it comes to once they finish high school or in college, it seems like a lot of them just attend them. And I think that's a real concern because a lot of the congregations are older. It's the older congregations.
Yeah, there's a generational thing definitely going on here. Eric.
It's a harking back to a comic on the door. Hermeneutics. The word on the street is hermeneutics. I always love that cartoon. The English language gangs always make pops annoying, always annoy the police. But to kind of key in what Sheldon was saying, I rebelled from the church of my youth because of the feeling that, and I'm part of it, the quote, now that I'm part of the quote unquote older generation, I guess. I think forcing religion on people, no matter what their age, forcing religion on people never work. When your children are small, you can drag them to church because they have no other choices. But eventually they're gonna have choices. And they're gonna make those choices based on the experience.
Yep.
There are some kids who are dragged to this church who, because of their experiences here, stayed, or at least stayed around. They may have went away to college, but they, they come back.
You don't have a sense of alienation.
Yeah, you don't
Yeah.
have a sense that this is someplace you're obligated to be.
Right.
I think that's probably the easiest way to sum it up.
Okay. Oh,
Oh, that
Anna.
wasn't the same thing, but it fits in. Some people that I've met say they don't feel the need to go to church, but they're spiritual in other ways.
Yes.
And it's hard when you haven't had the experience of your youth or. I mean, I feel like in general, we're very welcoming to people of all ages. But for me, you're missing out on something, the family feeling and the camaraderie. I taught young children starting when I was 12. And there's just nothing like, I mean, I grew up with the same group of 5 or 6 kids in church from the time I was, my mother carried me in until I was 16 or 17 with a brief rebellion in there, but
So you had a good experience.
yeah, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, a lot of people do not.
Okay, now I'm watching the clock here. So, Eva,
Very quickly, this is on the very, very sensitive maybe topic is in regards to the Catholic Church, why the attendance decline is in the news many times because of all the abuse
Yeah.
that happened in the Catholic Church and how the church handled that.
and how they handled it.
How they handle that, and that one of the reasons why the attendance when people were losing faith. And the attendance in church declined drastically.
Absolutely.
By 50%. The sensitive topic, but nevertheless, it's out there.
Yeah. Okay, so the bad news first, the incredibly shrinking church in America. And that is the church attendance is declining in America, largely across the board, but especially among the 20-somethings. More and more, when people state their affiliation, like on a survey, they will check none of the above. And in most recent surveys, well, 50 years ago, very few people were doing that. 50 years ago, very few. These days, depending on the poll you follow, 20 to 25% of Americans check that, which is essentially the same number as check Catholic or check evangelical. Those three now top the list. And it's especially telling among those under 30, which is something like 35% check that. Now there's a PS, which is now as for claimed attendance. Surveys check that kind of thing too. And here's kind of the interesting thing. I think it's probably dropped off in the last 5 years, but for about 30 years, while the number of nuns was rising, the claims of attendance stayed around 40%. Stayed around 40%. Which would be really good news, except most people were lying. I'm putting that kind of starkly. It isn't so much that they were lying, it's that the notion of what regular attendance has changed. And so back, 40, 50 years ago, regular attendance was maybe you showed up minimally 3 weekends a year, 3 weekends a month. 3 weekends a month, and then maybe a midweek service or a Sunday evening service or whatever. And now many people who come monthly or maybe every 6 weeks would still check regular attendance. And that's what accounts for that little bit. Okay, so a text I want us to look at, and there are Bibles in front of you, is Luke chapter 18, verses 1 to 8. Luke chapter 18, the first 8 verses. Then Jesus told his disciples a parable by showing them that they should always pray and not give up. He said, in a certain town, there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared about men. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, grant me justice against my adversary. And for some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, even though I don't fear God or care about men, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice so that she won't eventually wear me out with her coming. And the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Now, do you see the main point of the story? I mean, the main point of the story is that this unjust judge who doesn't care about people, doesn't care about God, but he finally grants the consistent pleas just as a nuisance. Then the God who loves everyone is for sure answering the pleas. But then there's the zinger at the end. But when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? And essentially what he's saying there is, will there be people pleading to him? You know, God's always there listening to the pleas. Is anyone going to be making them? You know, so we move in that now. That's one text. There are other texts in Scripture, Matthew 16 and 18, part of the Good Confession, but Jesus' response to Peter is, in the gates of Hades, upon this rock I will establish my church, and the gates of Hades will not put it out. Later on in Matthew 24, verse 35, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Philippians 2, verses 10 to 11, every knee will bow in the end. And then essentially the whole book of Revelation is making the point that in the end, the kingdom of God triumphs. So you have to put this question that Jesus raises here up against that. But there are some reasons for the historic decline in church attendance in America, and I broadly grouped them into 5. There's probably about 50 in here, but grouping them into 5 generally. Worldviews colliding, a big issue. It's been going on for a while. Interfaith awareness rising, growing familiarity with Eastern thought and other worldwide spiritual traditions. When I was growing up, till I was 13 years old, I had run into one Jewish family who happened to be our next door neighbor. That was it, period. Numbers of different towns in Canada, one Jewish family. Grew up in other small towns, and essentially it was a very ingrown church that essentially paid attention to itself. Very few people knew anybody who was all that different from them. They didn't particularly talk to them. It was pretty ingrown. Now, and it's been this way for a while, for 30 or 40 years, but our kids go off to university and their roommate could be Hindu. And they will have Jewish teachers, they will have Islamic teachers, they will have Christian teachers. We work with people who are in other major world faiths, not just Baptists and Methodists, but people who look at the world in a completely different kind of way. And so that changes one's notion of reality at that point. So interfaith awareness is a big issue. I struggled with the words here, but modernism giving way to postmodernism, which for the record, I will say that I'm probably a postmodernist myself, so I'm not trying to bash postmodernism, But what I am, but there are some things happening here that change people's perspectives. And one is deconstructing sacred texts. You know, that's across the board, whether it's the Quran or Eastern text or the Christian Bible or Hebrew scripture. And I mean, it's interesting, the Quran is just beginning to experience that. But the sacred texts are being deconstructed, by which I mean people are not just accepting the words on the pages they read, but they're wondering how they got there. And they're wondering what the original context was and what the original intent was and what the historical context is. And when you start doing that, you come to a few different conclusions than when you're just going with the words on the page, I would say, rather uncritically. So modernism to postmodernism. And then here's where I struggled with the words, is kind of hyper-rationalism giving way to corrosive skepticism and suspicion. In a lot of ways, modernism has sort of become like the serpent eating its tail, that it's become so scientific, by which I mean privileging science above all else. And it's become so hyper-rational that it's turned on destroying itself, leading to suspicion and leading to broad skepticism. So for instance, term I used numbers of years ago that usually confused quite a few people is a hermeneutic of suspicion, you know, which means interpretation of a text based on suspecting and suspecting and suspecting all the way down. A hermeneutic of suspicion. But if you're wondering what that means, it's what the media does all the time. Nothing is true until you can absolutely prove it. And, you know, which of course, a lot of things are true that you can't quite prove, but you know in your gut, that's the truth. You know, but modernism has pushed the envelope on that. Now, more positively, that meant that certitude started giving way to intellectual humility. I like that. Long-standing traditional understandings of text and traditions are now interpreted in light of their historical context and original intent. So a big example here would be traditional notions of hell. There are very few world-class scholars who hold to traditional views of hell. They understand that Jesus was talking about something when he talked about hell, but the traditional notions are highly doubtful. And of course, it was the traditional notions that were driving a certain group of people to church all the time. You know, well, when you pull that off and say, I doubt scripture was quite saying that forever and ever, baking, broiling, blistering, forever and ever and ever, kind of doubt that's where the text was going. You know, well, that's changed viewpoints and perspectives. Eva's already got here, but the second broad group, the first decade of the 21st century was pretty hard on religion. First of all, with 9/11, the terrifying face of religious fanaticism was exposed. Fanatic Islamists. Then we kind of looked around and said, they're not the only fanatics in the world, and it's always ugly. The scandal of sexual abuse, first publicized in the Catholic Church, big in the first decade of the 21st century. But I have to say immediately, but then elsewhere, you can't be dismissed as a purely Catholic phenomenon. Southern Baptist Convention got hammered with it. Christian Chronicles, the Church of Christ, it's a great piece of journalism, regularly wins awards, but it features a Church of Christ youth minister in jail for numbers of years now for just now. It's not the first one. I mean, you somehow think, you know, I got an exemption because I'm a Church of Christ minister. Could never happen. No, I mean, it's across the board a problem. Okay. Then religious debates over homosexuality and abortion turned ugly. And the gospel got traded in for politicized hot button issues. And none of that helped. Now, conversely, the next broad category, having so many Christian resources at our fingertips. You know, think about it. Video sermons, podcasts of celebrated Bible teachers. I don't really need to go to church. I watch Charles Stanley. You know, it's right there. All I have to do is turn on the TV. Okay. Worship options online, entire collections of Bible software on our smartphones, and social media connecting us to hundreds of Christian friends who some suppose needs church. And you think about that, I'm not knocking this. I'm just saying it changes the game at that point. It's a different world than it was before. Now, the big one is Christianity's branding problem, and it could be described in all sorts of problems, but insisting on dogmatic answers to matters that are ultimately transcendent and mysterious. Big mistake. I mean, it's hurt the church in any number of ways, but insisting on dogmatic answers to answers that are beyond our ability to know, you know, but insisting that I'm right on this. Well, nobody understands that really. We may have to differ on that, particularly on the details here. Okay, it's defensiveness and evident discomfort with tough questions. That's the first thing I ran into. You know, 14 years old, and I could already tell any question I had as a 14-year-old, nobody in my home church wanted even brought up. And so, okay. And you thought, well, I guess there's something wrong with me. I thought that for the first year or two. And then I realized who was having the real problem. It wasn't me. But a lot of younger generations hit the wall on that. The selective use of scripture. And we run into that all the time. The whole issue of gay issues in scripture are based on just almost absurd selective use of scripture. Churches weighed against the original teachings of Jesus and found wanting. That's a big issue. Now, as a restorationist, I get that. You know, that's what we've always been trying to do, is weigh churches against the original teachings of Jesus. We've succeeded often, and we haven't quite in some ways, but at least we know that's a fair enough a mirror. Church is perceived too often as anti-gay, sexist, racist, and anti-science. The ill-fated alliances of some churches with politics and nationalism. It's fear-based ways of relating to life in the world. So that in the end, many unchurched folks see themselves as more moral, more compassionate, more loving, and more committed to justice than many churches are. You can talk to them, you know, they don't really make a big point about that. They're not particularly self-righteous, but they just look at it and say, hey, even I see the problem with what we're doing with this group or what we're doing with that group, and your church does what? You know, in other words, folks who seek to make sense of a God they still believe in. Now, I would note that a lot of the nuns still believe in God, really quite seriously. They're non-affiliated, but they're not necessarily non-affiliated with God. And that's kind of, I don't know, someone mentioned spirit, Anna, maybe spirit, you know, that they're spiritual, not religious. But folks who seek to make sense of a God they still believe in, but whom they struggle to find in churches as they've experienced it. Now, here's the kicker. This is the one that doesn't fit the others. And it was only in this week's updating of these things that I came across this website by Carrie Newhoff. People leave churches when things are going well. Well, we didn't expect that one. And that's actually true in a couple of ways. When things are going really well in their lives, they leave churches. Hey, I'm fine. I'm also busy. You know, life's going good. But that isn't quite what Neuhoff is driving at. People leave churches every time a church makes progress. It loses some people. Now, maybe more accurately, I could say every time a church changes, it will lose people. Initially, the first response will be a small exodus out the door, even though it may be aligning the church with the rest of caring society. But should not surprise anybody that when a church moves to a new building, because the people will come, well, yeah, the people will come in 6 years, but the people will go in the first 6 months. Okay, that is often the experience of churches who are actually doing the right thing. Or hire a new senior leader. You know, I mean, they may be the best leader a church has ever had, but you lose a few people just at that point, because I don't know, it's part of the consumerist approach to churches. That you're not, you know, a lot of people are not going to churches because they're trying to really connect to God. It's just part of, I'm buying an American experience that should please me. And so, oh, new minister, not sure about that. Or anytime someone launches a new program, or conversely stops an old one. Simply put, and this was the quote that I thought, this is true. The people who are at your church today are there because they like it the way it is. Now think about that. Not everybody. You know, there's some contrarian out there who's always wanting it to be different. There's somebody who sees the future and wants it to be different. But the majority of people in a church are in that church because they like it the way it is, and someone comes along and says, but we need to up our abilities here. We need to expand the gospel. We really need to come up with good news of great joy that's for all the people and not just for us. Okay, there are probably other reasons. I'll throw it open for a few 2 or 3 minutes on reasons. Which reasons resonate most with you? Anything come to your mind very quickly? Scott?
I think years ago, churches in general gave up on the value of persuasion. And they simply said, you know what, we've had enough. We're going to be declarative. We're going to force ideas and morals and, in fact, laws into effect that make people behave in a way that makes me feel more comfortable. And because of that, churches make declarative statements from the pulpit or other very public ways about what's moral and what's not moral, and then they're feeling better about what they're saying. But in reality, every time they make one of those statements, they've given up on persuasion, and they've told people, the reason we're saying this is because we don't want to talk about what you need to talk about.
Yeah.
And we're going to shut it down right here.
Yeah.
Whatever the issue is, if you hear those declarative statements from a pulpit, that's what they're actually saying. Don't talk to us about this.
Yeah. Aaron?
Well, the one that sticks with me is the last one, the one that you said struck you as odd or interesting.
Yeah.
Odd. We've experienced it here.
Yeah.
And to key off what Scott's saying is you've made declarative statements from the pulpit. And I'm not going to mention his name because everybody remembers him. When we talked about women serving in the services, this man got up, made a statement, pulled some scripture involved, and literally walked out of the building when we announced that we were actually going to have women serving in churches.
Yeah.
Church services. He literally got up, talked, and then left.
Well, it
And
wasn't me. I think John was up front right there.
Yeah. Let's get that bus warmed up, shall we?
Yeah.
But, you know.
Yes.
When we talked about women in church, we talked about. Anytime you make a significant change.
Yeah, you
you're
gotta
gonna-
factor
you're
it
gonna
in.
upset some people, and we have made declarative statements, you know, we've changed leadership now in the past, 4 years, we've changed leadership 3 times.
Twice.
We had you and then we had.
Okay,
two
we've had
others.
3 leaders.
We've had 3 leaders in the past 4
You
years.
still got 2 of us.
Yes, but I mean, the first leadership change was gradual. It was, you know.
Yeah, okay, we don't have time for a whole history of the church, but we get your point. We get your point. Charles?
Yeah, this is really good. All of these resonate with me. I just want to say, coming from a Christian college environment where I've worked with kids all day long, and many of them coming from longstanding Christian families. The problem is what they are rejecting is church, and they've confused church with the actual gospel message.
Right,
They've never even heard the gospel.
often, yes.
And so that's often been my conversation with them, is you're really not as mad at God as you're coming off. You're mad at what people have done with it.
Yeah.
And that's a very different thing. But I think
Yeah.
a lot of times churches don't realize the vibes that they're giving off have nothing to do with what the gospel actually is.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now,
Yeah.
this is sort of, oh, Kathy, no,
Yeah, and part of what we're comparing it to was, say, maybe the 40s and 50s, when there was a real sense of national, Christian church things, the outlook in general society was positive if you went to church. People who didn't even personally have faith, went to church because their bosses all did and everybody did. And there was a lot of, just social acceptance of Christianity, which we have
Right.
definitely gotten away from, to the point where the loudest Christians are the ugliest Christians sometimes. And a lot of people don't even want to say that. They don't want their name to be linked with those people that are so loud and ugly. And so they tone it down. So we have lost that, which may not be a bad thing. I'm just saying it exists. That happened in this time period.
and a whole lot of this is not about this is a bad or good, it's just what happens. But it does change the game. I mean, what Kathy was saying, I heard expressed another way, which I did not write down here, but the end of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War was more significant religiously than one would suppose, because when it was a matter of the free world versus communism, and church was a manifestation of the free world, you couldn't contest the church. It wasn't respectable to be unchurched because we were part of the free world, and churches where that was protected. When that was no longer an issue, not sure it's that factor is the main factor or the only, certainly not the only factor, but it's a factor that all of those things change what happens in the society. Now it's perfectly respectable to be a nun, to be non-affiliated. Okay, some of this I have to ask you to just sort of table, look at it. What might be healthy, productive responses to these challenges? Now you go through them one by one and think through what would be a healthy, productive response to these challenges. I'm going to tell you the right answer.
Declare.
That declarative statement. The right answer, I'm being a little facetious, but I also believe what I'm saying, which is the right answer is trust. Trust God. Trust God and the life he's giving you. Trust God and the life he's giving us. and you'll see through the tough time, the tough loss, the this, the that, whatever, that this issue has changed, and we go, oh my goodness, we can't be thinking that. No, trust God. Listen carefully for a while and see whether the issue hasn't changed because it's changed to a better viewpoint. So the point is trust, that you know, time will go on and time will tell. Okay, now back to the text. And you know, you can open your Bibles again, but in Luke chapter 18, we were in verses 1 to 8, verses 9 to 14. The next story, and I understand that the compilation of the Gospels is subject to great research, and I'm not necessarily saying that that story came immediately after the first one, but it is there in the text immediately after, where Jesus talks about a certain man goes up to the temple, and a Pharisee and a tax collector, and the Pharisee basically says, you know, God, I thank you that I'm not like reprobates and sinners and prostitutes and this tax collector. And the tax collector simply prays, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And then Jesus says that the tax collector went home justified before God rather than the Pharisee. Now, when I put those two stories together, this is what sort of contemplatively and spiritually I come up with. The answer to the question now is, will he find faith on earth? Is yes, he will find faith on earth, but not necessarily in the people you expect. That's the answer to that question. Okay, now I'm going to run through the next section pretty quickly. It's a lot of important concepts in it. But here is the good news. And as usual, we spend 70% of our time in the bad news and then rush into good news at the end. Okay, not so, yeah. Okay, so now the good news. The good news is there's people all around you in your neighborhood, places you work, people you walk by in the city, people all around us, and millions worldwide, tens of millions worldwide, who are seeking authentic, meaningful, purposeful lives. Most people are trying to do that. They're seeking a sense of wonder and awe, of a world re-enchanted, of encountering the presence of the sacred, the presence of God. They're seeking life that transcends endless, unsatisfying pursuit of things and lifestyle. Now think about that one. That one is a big one. They're looking for life that transcends endless and unsatisfying pursuit of things and lifestyle. And they're doing it sometimes in the weirdest of ways. Hence conspiracy theories, hence QAnon, hence populism in its most radical forms, hence mass movements. How could people be thinking that? Well, they've given up on consumerism and just finding meaning in the stuff they're buying. They know that's not working. And so they're looking for meaning anywhere, and they'll pull it out of the clouds, but just to put a little sense of meaning back in their lives. Okay, they're looking for answers to soul-destroying fear, anxiety, and anger. They're looking for deliverance from desires out of control, from attachments and addictions. They're looking for ways to start over, to begin again, to experience forgiveness, to rediscover their lost innocence. They're looking for loving communities where they feel they really belong. They're looking for community, yes, but they're also looking for communities that matter, that are doing something that gives them meaning and structure to their lives, that are about something other than just the self-preservation of the community. They're looking for a grand narrative, the real story of which their life stories are a part. They're looking for a palpable sense of a sustainable joy. You know, that to me, over the years, I've come more and more to, that's what's often missing, is that sense of sustainable joy to see them through life's undeniable challenges, difficulties, and losses. Not an easy quest, absolutely fundamental that people get back to joy. a strong sense of God's love. We could go into that, the wisdom to understand sacred texts in their original context. Also, the wisdom to understand that truth emerges almost everywhere and always has, not through thought conformity, but through multiple perspectives worked out together, and respect for diversity. That's where truth comes from. Truth doesn't come from some one person declaring, I've got it, and the rest of you need to catch up. It comes from the fact that a bunch of people disagree, but still keep loving and respecting one another until they come to the real truth on something. In short, they're looking for good news of great joy that's for all the people. You could find more, but here's what I want you to do as we're closing in here. Is how, can you imagine how it changes the world when people find this? And this is what this church is about. It's what a lot of churches are about. And it's what people are looking for, and this is the good news. And it's what we increasingly are trying to find our way toward. Now, here's more good news. I think there's every reason to be joyfully optimistic from what we now know and believing what we now believe. It's likely today that we stand on the threshold of a great global spiritual awakening, a religious turning point that comes, say, every 500 years, the likes of which has not been seen since the great reformations of the 16th century. Quick footnote, I say reformations because we Protestants believe there was only a Protestant Reformation. There was actually a Catholic Reformation too. So it was the 16th century was a century of reformations. It was a major turning point in church history. If you go back as a historian, you can find it happened 500 roughly, give me 50 years, give or take 50 years. You know, monasticism, Gregory the Great, Benedict of Nursia, 1000 AD, the rise of the papal monarchy, the rise of canon law completely shifted how Christianity was experienced. So what I believe we're about to see, and it's probably accidental, this 500-year thing, but it hasn't been seen for 500 years now. We're about to see a great spiritual shift, a cultural transformation, when people will learn to respect one another in their differences and learn to learn from one another, and discover that this too was part of what Jesus was trying to get us to understand. And here's the good news. Far from things falling apart, things may well be coming together. That's how I see it. Some things, in fact, need to fall apart, and in their falling apart, space is made for what is new and better. That's the way life always works. You go back and look at your life and you've suffered losses and things have fallen apart. And it was painful. Yes, it was painful. A few years later, you found that space was made for something new and often better, at least sustainable again. Okay, so in their falling apart, space is made for what is new and better. So it's always been when the church comes to its great turning points. All such times are at first unsettling, but they also offer great hope. They challenge what isn't working in church and its message and mission. They point to new insight and direction. And in the end, historically, this is what has always happened. Faith catches fire again and dynamically spreads, this time on this one globally, because we're no longer just a Eurocentral set of cultures. This time globally, a new world in the morning. Been a challenge on time. I appreciate your patience. I know there were great thoughts and great comments out there, but Julie, if you will lead us in prayer, please.